Hello and welcome. My name is Andy Salkeld, and this is my GT review, tournament report, whatever you want to call it, for the Leodis GT October 2022 that I attended this past weekend. I was playing Adepta Sororitas, and I ended up coming second, finishing 4-1. And the intention of this is to kind of talk through what the event was like, what the experience was like, and what my kind of strategies and everything like that was going into it. I'm going to show kind of the maps, the battle plans, talk through my army, how my opponent deployed, what I was thinking as I was selecting secondaries, what I was thinking as I was going through the game, and just try to talk through some of the kind of pivotal interactions and decisions I made. And the reason I do most of these videos is just to kind of lower the barrier to entry for people. This game is incredibly complicated. There's a lot going on, and sometimes mistakes can be made. And I just want to try and make it as easy for people to get into it as possible. I myself suffer from anxiety, and that anxiety is almost stopped me going to events before. I've been that nervous and worried about expectations and everything like that. And this is just a way I can help others who might feel the same. And if people learn something, great. And if not, it's there just as a resource that people can look to. So before I get into talking about the detail of it, I want to shout out to the Leodis game store. That's over in Farsley. They run this. They also run RTTs and various other events. I only started attending there kind of in May this year, and for the most part, it's been incredibly well run. We had one technology mess up where actually it paired us twice, but other than that, it was absolutely flawless that I experienced. The space is nice. It's a very welcoming atmosphere. The owners and tournament organizers do a fantastic job of kind of welcoming you and getting people involved. I myself got invited to take part in team events and things like that, and it was just such a nice atmosphere. The players there as well, shout out to them. They're some of the nicest people I've met. I had people and I don't like saying I'm good or anything like that, but people were coming up to me and complimenting me throughout the day, and it was such a nice feeling, just how polite and nice everyone was. I went with a group of friends. There was 5 of us. One person had never played in competitive 40k events in the past 10 years or something, and everyone was welcomed, whether you finished second like me or whether you finished towards the bottom end like some of my friends. It was welcoming throughout, really nice. Credit to the store and the people that attend there. I also want to just quickly mention I will be using the images from the UKTC tournament pack, so credit to them for producing it. And similarly, I'll be using the scoring sheet from Goonhammer, and again, credit to them for producing it. I've done none of the complicated stuff here. I just pulled a PowerPoint together. But yeah, that was kind of it. If you want to go back and look at some of my other videos, I produced a kind of a UKTC tournament circuit report where I go through every single one of the 9 missions on the terrain and describe what I would do, how I would operate, and what I think about going into those missions. And a lot of what I will talk about in this this video will refer back to bits of those. So you're welcome to look at those. It'll obviously change when the maps and terrain change, but largely I did what I said I was going to do, and it served me very well. The times when I adapted were largely due to the opponent I was playing and the army they were playing, etc. So that'll give you just a bit of a leg up, because I won't go into a lot of the nuance. I'll just try and cover some of the big things. So what I'll carry on from now, I will jump into kind of talking through my army. Got a couple of pictures of the army so that you can see what I'm playing. and then we'll talk through each map, each mission, and my opponent one at a time. I'm going to have to look at my other screen just to be able to switch on to the next kind of slides and so on, but just bear in mind with that. Anyway, let's crack on. So, I was playing Adepta Sororitas, or Sisters of Battle. I've been playing Sisters of Battle for 2 years now, give or take, and I've been playing them competitively for 6 months now. I started at the May Goonhammer Open, so yeah, that's about 6 months. And this is the only army I've been playing. I do have other armies, but Sisters is what I've kind of focused learning. And I've been running this exact list, give or take some numbers of Repentia or Zephyrim, for about 6 months, pretty much since Armour of Contempt came out, which I believe was the May balanced data slate or the April balanced data slate. And then when Nephilim came out, I just have run the same list, period, because that's when the points changed. So you'll see from the images, I run Spooky Sisters. This is a name that's been given to them by the Tabletop Titans Discord. I use Nighthaunt conversions for a lot of things. So my Repentia are Bladegeist Revenants, my Novitiates are Chain Rasp, and when I get on to doing some of the Penitent Engine stuff, they will be other parts of Nighthaunt, no doubt. The reason it came about is because I just didn't want to paint faces, and I didn't want to just use the normal helmets, so I went for empty hoods, and that just kind of led into the natural ghost theme of the army. I'm by no means an excellent painter, but I'm happy with kind of how these have turned out. And yeah, so the list. Morvenval, with her Warlord trait, Righteous Rage, she's kind of a linchpin alongside the Dogmata. Those two basically make the army do its thing. It allows you to scale up incredibly well and punch above the weight of what normally your T3 one wound model should be able to do. Canoness with Word of the Emperor, Chaplet of Sacrifice, Blazing Ire with a Blessed Blade. This is a tech piece for Fight Last, allowing you to engage on up to 3 fronts using Repentia, Fight on Death, a Fight Last, and then a normal charge, which can really swing combat in your favour on a turn. Then she also can turn off invuln, so again, very useful tech piece to be able to say, no, this thing's dying this turn, and no saves. Less good now that demons are out, but still very useful. The Chaplet of Sacrifice isn't essential, but Blazing Ire to have advance and charge is incredibly useful. I just haven't changed it. There might be a more efficient way to run this now. I know a lot of people like putting the Blade of St. Eleanor on her to do flat 3 damage, but I kind of like the Fight on Death from the Chaplet because it allows you to, again, punch up just a little bit more, but less good into Terminators, so that's kind of a meta choice. Dogmata with Sigil, and then immune to Psychic and +1 Sacred Rite, along with Warhymn. Normally, I'm just doing +1 Sacred Rite and Warhymn. I know I should probably just spend 1 CP to automatically get Warhymn every turn, but I'm such a sucker for just rolling it. That's a learning point for me in general that I need to kind of be happy with. But my CP usage is so tight that I often don't know if I can justify it or not. Repentia Superior, Hospitaller, they just do their normal things. The Hospitaller is more a threat than anything else. It makes your opponents very wary of attacking my 2x10 Retributors, but it also can threaten if they pick off some Repentia to get you some number of inches further forward, which again is also terrifying. So it's more of a threat than actually doing anything useful. But sometimes that's one of the best ways to play the game. Repentia Superior, just almost essential with Repentia themselves. Late game, she just becomes a go hold a point somewhere, do something like that. But being able to play around with the +1 to wound aura and accessing advance and charge on Repentia is fantastic. Nothing special about the troops, some Battle Sisters, some Novitiates. Then the best 22 points I ever spend in a unit of Crusaders. And then 2x8 Repentia, 1x4 Repentia. The reason I do this with a 1x4, I know a lot of people play 5, is because it means at the beginning of the game, I can outflank 2 Repentia squads, 1x4 and 1x8 for 1 CP. And this comes up later on because I believe it's 3 power level that goes to 6, and you can outflank 9 for 1 CP. And that comes up in game 4. I know some people like 5 Repentia because it just kills more. I just like the flexibility of being able to do that. Also means you can do things like outflank 1 big Repentia and 1 Battle Sister squad, just on power level. Or 2 Battle Sisters, 1 Repentia. It just gives you a lot more flexibility than having them all at 6. Then I have 1x5 Seraphim with Hand Flamers. These, again, are a bit of a tech pick against lots of Eldar and other things that are kind of T3 and relatively low armor. There is a lot of this in my meta, and therefore I haven't seen the need to take them out. I know a lot of people just run Zephyrim, but I find them incredibly useful, and they come up a lot in my games. 2x8 Zephyrim. Zephyrim are kind of the next layer down from Repentia, and they are just fantastic. These having 3 jump units also potentially gives me access to retrieve Nephilim data. There might be an argument to go to 1x6 Seraphim and drop 1 Zephyrim from a squad. I haven't needed to do it yet. Often I'm happy just scoring 8 on Nephilim data. But I could see a reason for going up. We'll see how that goes. Then 1x6, 1 Castigator with autocannons. Again, a lot of people were kind of off on this to begin with, but now I think it's gone down to 135 points, and it's one of 2 things in the army that can reach out over 24 inches, and it just punishes Eldar, it punishes Necrons, like it hurts Tau. It's just very good in the matchups where we can struggle as an army. And yes, there are some games where people are just like, I point my big guns at it and dies, but it probably wasn't going to be good in that game anyway. It's also done, like this weekend, it had a few adventures and it was great. Previously, it's also had a few adventures where it was taking out Armigers and stuff like that by itself. So I like it, but the main reason I bring it is because I bring 2x10 Retributors, and this setup allows me to fire potentially, I think it's 40 multi-melter activations over the game, because it's 8 times 5, and they are so tricky and tough to remove that either your opponent has to overcommit into them or they undercommit into them and you get to keep firing. And combined with the Hospitaller, it just allows you to do lots of shenanigans about moving out the multi-melters, pulling back behind cover, then rezzing them out in front of cover again, all sorts of stuff like that. They have 2 cherubs in each because it just allows you that little more efficiency. And then I have 1 Rhino, which is normally just a springboard to allow me to, say, raise banners turn 1, or everything like that. It's been a very good list. I haven't been disappointed with it yet, but it does have weaknesses. I am always terrified of indirect and fast-moving shooting that can get angles. I play a lot of my games with the sole intention of protecting my Repentia from this, because the Battle Sisters in cover are often still hard to remove, but at the same point, the Repentia are incredibly squishy, and you'll see as I talk through my games, I talk about a lot of screening and protecting to enable me to kind of go through and deliver upon my strategy. So anyway, that's kind of the army list of where I am. And now what we're going to do is we're going to go into each kind of mission, each map, what my broad thoughts were going into this, and then how it played out. So hopefully this works. Right, so game 1 is on Abandoned Sanctuaries. I despise this mission. I despise a lot of the missions, actually, thinking about it. There's at least 3 that I'm going to say I dislike this mission. This one I don't like because it has a large end of game scoring. If you go second, there's potentially 7 points available, 2 for holding the center objective at the end of your turn, and 5 for holding it at the end of the game. So that's plus 7, and typically the person going second also gets 12 because they can hold 3 points more than their opponent, which means they're assuming you score 8 throughout, then that means there's potentially plus 11 points that going first has to pick up from somewhere. And that makes this a very challenging mission that you have to kind of think about and plan properly for. And I was against Necrons. And Necrons they're a very strong army. I was against a very good opponent, and I just don't like this as the kind of first mission you go into. I was like, okay, so hardest mission, worst time of the day, and it's a very good opponent playing an army that is probably better than mine. Don't know, probably even. The main difference between what I would say is normal Necron lists and what I was playing against was they were more shooty heavy. They had 2 destroyer bricks, not 1, and they had 1 massive Tombblade squad. And that amount of firepower is terrifying. They also had the Silent King, a Transcendent Catan, and some Scarabs, but the amount of shooting they had was very scary. So my plan going into this is to assume I'm going first, and to then, because I have to be aggressive if I go first to make up the deficit, and then adapt knowing I'm going second. And that was broadly my plan. Deployment, on this terrain, there is typically only 1 place the Silent King can go, and if the Silent King goes there, all the things that want to be buffed by the Silent King also go there, which is why I have it marked as Necron Castle. Because if you put the Silent King in the middle, that obscuring rune does not protect him from certain angles, which is very, very risky. And you can't put him behind the rune on the Necron's left, my right, because it's not obscuring. So the Silent King kind of has to go in that back corner, as we will talk about in another mission. And what that means is you can kind of prepare your game knowing that that's where the Silent King is going, and that's where the stuff the Silent King is going to buff is going. Obviously, there's a pre-game move, but on this map, you can't leave your deployment zone, and you can't forward deploy. So this is kind of the best situation for playing against Necrons with their pre-game move, everything OBSEC. And I lost the roll-off, won the roll-off. I was going second. So I had a very clear plan of what I was going to do is I was going to push the right flank incredibly hard and collapse it as quickly as I could. Because if I could collapse that flank, move have my shrine over there, and then I would just collapse that flank as fast as possible whilst denying my opponent primary on the left, using my Repentia squads to just basically go in and absolutely destroy everything he touches there. Because he's not going to want to move his destroyers out because they'll die. He won't move out his Tombblades because they'll die. And it was very much a, right, let's harass that flank to deny primary whilst crushing the right flank, so that I could then start scoring 8s whilst my opponent is scoring 4s. Because we were both experienced, so we both know going into the middle is kind of a trap, but it's a trading war, and he's more elite than I am. So if he starts putting stuff in the middle, I start winning the game. So none of us ever went into the middle objective until his turn 4, where he moved his Catan into the middle, because there was no way I was realistically going to shift it until the end of the game. And what happened? I talk about this in one of the mission reviews. I set my Castigator up on the line, drove down the right flank, and shot into his Scarabs that were on his home objective. Over 2 points, the Castigator alone just killed all the Scarabs there, through reanimation, through the Spider returning one, everything like that. The Castigator just did its work. It got shot down to 1 wound, and then it just hid on the shrine and held that and started scoring me 8s over and over for the rest of the game. And there was no shooting that could get angles on it, so it just stood there happily. Everything else I had was just harassing the left and slowly crushing the right flank. I used Seraphim and Zephyrim that pushed down the right and then in, and deep struck and then across. And they allowed me to kind of pin my opponent in, threatening all the other assets he had there. So like the Tomb Blades that were slowly moving out and everything like that. I think at one point Cassie might have got line of sight to the Tomb Blades, which also she is just amazing at killing Tomb Blades. So that was a really good kind of use of her. Everything else, the way I'd kind of set this up, because I knew I was going second, was I'm going to try to tie secondaries, because he's very likely to score 12 on Ancient Machineries. I can't stop that. He's very likely to score 10 to 12 on Treasures of the Aeons, as long as I start putting stuff wholly within his table quarter, which is what I ended up doing with sort of the Castigator, the Seraphim, the Zephyrim that were all in there, and they were in his deployment zones. They were kind of denying him on that. And Treasures of the Aeons, because I crushed one flank hard, it meant he couldn't score 5s on it. He was scoring 2s or 3s at most. And because he was such an elite version of Necrons, he wasn't going to be able to score the 3s without giving me a big asset. So for this, I chose no prisoners, defend the shrine, and Nephilim data. I didn't want to take banners because that just incentivizes him coming to take them down. I didn't want to take Sacred Grounds, because my thought was, if I go first, I have to commit a lot to score, or I have to, or I then end up losing assets later in the game that can do it. If I go second, yes, I score 15, but I'd rather take something that I'm fairly confident I could get 8 on, and then just nickel and dime the rest of the score. So what happened was we slowly traded resources back and forth, never going into the middle. You'll see I never scored anything from being in the middle, which I was fine with. But it was very much I was just oppressing his primary and trying to just score kind of even on secondaries. Castigator was an absolute hero in this, just did all the work and then survived, and the surviving was really crucial because that was what allowed me to start getting 8s in comparison to my opponent's 4s. And it was a real, like, that was kind of clutch. The unit of Zephyrim I deep struck, which are going to be the units marked in black on future maps, they came down and did Rod, and then they got hit by some Catan powers, and then again them surviving there basically denied 2 points a turn on Purge the Vermin, because they were in the deployment zone and they were wholly within the table quarter, and my opponent had to deal with everything else that I had. I didn't have very much left at the end of the game. Morvenval died, one of my Ret squads died, but the points were so far in my lead, and because I was going second, I had the advantage there, and it just made it a much, much tighter game. Or it meant it was kind of mine to lose, so I just played very conservatively towards the end of the game, knowing how much I denied of my opponent. Fantastic game. Opponent was really nice. It was an absolute pleasure to play them. Ever since I went to Leodis, I think his name's David. Just bear with. Do I have my phone? No, I can't remember. Oh, I've got my sheets. Hold on. Chris. His name was Chris. I think I played a David though. So his name was Chris, and ever since we, sorry, I have paper sheets with all my scoring on. I'm still old-fashioned and like paper. But yeah, ever since I went to Leodis, we've just always talked to each other and always been like, it'd be really nice to play sometime, because we're both kind of friendly and chatty, both respect each other as good players, and we just kind of talked and was like, this is good, just going to be a good game, whether it's whoever wins, it's still going to be a good game, because it was just so clear that we both played the same way, playing to intent, playing to kind of pre-prepare, everything like that. And yeah, it was a very close game. I think I did my strategy justice on this one, and I was very pleased with it, because Necrons are a hard matchup, and it's a hard mission, and I think going second was massive, even though I keep calling him David, even though Chris held the middle objective, giving him the bonus 7 points at the end, I gained so much just on primary, because what I did at the end was I just held a V, ignoring his home in the middle, and it still scored me a 12, and that was kind of too much, because I was moving Rets because I'd saved my novitiates inside the Rhino to make sure I could swamp Obsec onto the left-hand point on my final turn, and he didn't have the models left to be able to take that from me. So yeah, very close. I could probably play it tighter. I think putting the shrine on the right, far away from his castle, was the right decision, even though it meant I slowly had to walk my Rets and other units over towards it to just make sure it was safe. But I had all my Zephyrim, all my Seraphim, all my like deep striking, and the Castigator there to just punish that flank as hard as possible. And because it was against a different Necrons list that's more combat orientated, this may not work as well. But given the deployment, I kind of knew that's what I had to do to stand a chance of winning it. So yeah, that was mission 1. I was happy to go second on this. I do think GW needs to do something about scoring, because a lot of my friends and other players were like, I rolled and I went first, which meant I lost. One of my friends, he was there playing Ultramarines, fantastic player, and he had to play the Ultramarines mirror, and he went first. And in that situation, it's like there is just no way that two armies that do exactly the same thing, the only thing that can change the outcome of that game is dice rolls. And that feels bad, because there's no kind of skill in generalmanship that can change that outcome, because it's just knowing that bottom of turn they've got plus 11 points that just puts you out. And also with things like, say, their secondary, which is similar to Sacred Ground, going second means they can just score it on all of them. And things like that just feel bad, so I hope there are some tweaks when we get the next round of missions. But yeah, that'll be a common thread as I talk about a lot of these things. So now let's move on to mission 2, which is Data Scry Salvage. And this, I believe, was against a gentleman called Tom. So Data Scry Salvage is hull 2, hull 3. It is a fairly... I like this mission. I don't necessarily like the UKTC terrain on it, but I like the mission. I think the mission is fairly good. but it can be incredibly punishing if your opponent has access to good deep strikes and good kind of a bit like reach, because if you can tag their home objective, it means they can't start the action, which means not only do you potentially deny them 4 points because it's a hold 2, hold 3, you also deny them at least 2 from the mission and so on. So it really favors kind of fast, mobile, good deep strike charge ability to just clear it out. Now, here is this. I'm going to say this a lot in a lot of the games. I knew in this mission that I won if I did nothing, because I have better secondaries than my opponent. If we both hold 2, hold 3, or just hold 2, if we both just hold 3 and score 8s and our 2s throughout the entire game, tying us on primary, my secondaries will outscore my opponent's secondaries, because we probably both take banners, but I have Defend the Shrine, Leap of Faith, and he has to take something else, which probably means he's taking ones that are aggressive and requires him coming towards me, which is exactly what Sisters players want. And yes, it allows us to win, but it does feel bad when I can kind of say, okay, this is my game to lose, therefore you have to take risks, and by taking risks into a Sisters army, you are leaving yourself up to get severely punished, because that Sisters punish people within range. It's just the way the army functions. So the way I set up this game was essentially, I typically try to set up my Rhino with 2 Battle Sister squads in it, so that I can pre-game move it using Carry Forth the Faithful onto the top objective, which is the one I will nominate as my shrine, and then I will dump out the 2 Battle Sister squads with the intention to raise banners with them. This assumes I go first, and then I will try to screen them as best as I can, so that they can't charge them, and shooting into them is bad, because once they're tagged with OBSEC, they're sticky, and that means that I can walk off them, and then all I need to do is screen deep strikes and kill anything that could get to them, and then I'm kind of like, I'm fine with that, and so on. So that was my plan. And then what I do is I often start Zephyrim near, so that if I do need to use them to raise a banner turn 1, they can. And I start my Repentia in the lower ruin, because my opponent was playing Creations of Bile, which is it's a kind of meta version of it. It had Black Rune Terminators, so it had 10 Black Rune Terminators, then 2x5 Terminators, and only 1 unit of Possessed. I think I would have been more scared if it had more Possessed in it, because they're faster, basically. Although, I'll say this, the Terminators with Advance and Charge from Creations of Bile are very fast. And I was very scared of them, and I did everything I could to kind of deal with those. I put Zephyrim and Seraphim in Deep Strike, and I'll explain kind of how those played out later. He put his 10 Black Rune Terminators in Deep Strike, which I don't know whether it was an error, but it gave me a very clear goal of, I am going to screen you out on turn 2 and turn 3, and essentially force you to deploy way back in your deployment zone. And that is what played out. And he was essentially deploying them on his board edge. And then it took 2 turns to get anywhere. So I don't know if it's the right or wrong thing to do. I think if they were on the board and they were the threat that came in, they would probably kill a lot more, but they would probably die just as easy as the 5 Terminators that came in. So what happened here was, I essentially set myself up to be able to raise my banners and then say, right, over to you, opponent. You have to come to me, and that's where it is. I went first, which I really like on this mission because it allows me to set up my shrine and banners plays, so that I can always so that I can raise the banners and then force my opponent to come to me. What I had novitiates set up to also go to my shrine in case for some reason my obsec plan didn't work, and because my opponent didn't have any shooting, I just started driving my castigator and walking my retributors forward. I paid very careful attention to screening to make sure that his 10 Black Rune Terminators couldn't come down anywhere in my deployment zone. And what I did on my turn 2, and this may seem counterintuitive in a lot of cases, but I actually drove my castigator into the mid-board, and then I deep struck Seraphim in the middle of nowhere. But what it did was it pushed where he could deep strike the Terminators even further back. Because his turn 1, he charged in a unit of Terminators into 8 Repentia. They killed the Repentia, but the Repentia fought on death and killed them back. Only 4 Repentia died because he was using all his power fists and minuses to hit with no rerolls, etc., etc. And it was an unlucky combat, but I was very happy because I had 4 Repentia left that went and killed the other 5 Terminators that were stood at the top. And yeah, so I dealt with those 2 threats. The Possessed were holding the middle objective, and what I did was I basically pushed my Castigator, my Seraphim. I had Repentia in his backlines, and he was basically deep striking within 6 inches of his own board edge, and I was happy with that because I knew it'd take 1 to 2 turns to actually get into the game. There was one clutch play where he had positioned his cultists so that I could draw line of sight from my Castigator down onto his home objective. So I killed 1 unit of cultists just with the Castigator. Then he had 1 more unit of cultists there. So on my turn 3, this will also have been turn 2. I deep struck my Zephyrin there, and I charged them into his cultists using Miracle Dice to then be able to take him off his home objective, which meant he then couldn't action on turn 3. Couldn't action on... Sorry, yeah, this is my turn 3 I did this. I'm trying to remember the scoreboarding. But yeah, he couldn't do this on turn... He couldn't do the action. They lived... Well, they killed the cultists, which denied him 6 points. Then a Venom Crawler came round and they lived through the Venom Crawler attacks, and it just kind of... It just made it almost impossible for him to keep scoring those. Then I used the... and then they killed it the next round of combat. And slowly but surely, I was just picking off more and more assets every turn. The multi-melter Rets were a threat. They killed 1. They killed some Possessed in shooting. They killed 1 Venom Crawler, but largely they didn't do anything. But the threat of them was huge. And then at the end of the game, I'd kind of just pushed him so far back that it was very hard for him to get back in it. One clutch thing that I realised at the end of the game was he had a Master of Possession, I think this is it, with the 2 Supplicants, and he had it strung out over his 2 points, and he had like 10 Black Rune Terminators in my face on my turn 5. And so I created a screen with novitiates so that he couldn't get into any of the meat or onto my objectives. But what I did was I used my retributors to shoot that squad that was holding his 2 objectives, because that meant if he wanted any end of game primary, he needed to move the Terminators backwards. And I almost didn't see it. I was like, well, I can't deal with those. And then I realized, oh, wait, they are in range of multi-melters. I'll shoot them. I'll see what happens. And yeah, they just got obliterated. and that basically sealed the deal because he couldn't score more than 8 at he couldn't get a 12 because he couldn't hold more than me, and the fact that he had to take kill secondaries whereas I had to take stand and do nothing secondaries was pretty much what made it out. As you'll see in some of the comments, this is the very first time I have ever remembered to use the Word of the Emperor miraculous ability in the whole of Nephilim, where his Nurgle Demon Prince came in, killed Cassie, brutally killed Cassie. It was going to happen. But then I turned off invulns and was like, right, multi-metals kill the first time. He stood up from death, and then the Canoness went in, fought last him, and then killed him in combat with no invulns. So it was great, and that all worked pretty well. As much as I enjoy winning with it, I think I do wish there was something more proactive in the Sisters game plan. But as a Blue Magic the Gathering player, I am very happy that this is how they play out, where it's just kind of like, I want to do something, no, not quite, no, not quite. But I do think there needs to be a rebalancing of secondaries. I don't think you want kill points or anything like that in the game, but I do think some of the secondaries just need to be looked at, because it can be, you can go into a game and knowing you've already won or lost, and that is not healthy. I don't think it can be really demotivating and so on. But yeah, this is pretty much the exact strategy I talk about in my mission review, and I adapted it slightly for the use of Seraphim to screen deep strikes and everything like that. But very happy with this, very good result. And then on to game 3. So this was game 3. This was against Alex. And Alex was playing all Dreadnoughts, all Caladius, Custodes. Now, this is when we had the pairing error. So what happened was they paired the round, but they accidentally paired it twice. So no one knew what table they were on. And in this pairing scenario, I was paired against a different Custodes player who had 3 sets of bikes, and I was terrified because I was like, oh boy, that's going to be challenging, because they're so fast. I can probably only realistically kill 1 unit a turn, maybe 2 with a fight on death or a fight last, but largely speaking, that was going to be quite tough because they're faster than me. However, this has so much firepower at range from the Caladius that I was like, this could be quite scary. And we kind of spoke about this, and we were like, don't know how to play it, don't know whether he should be playing aggressive or not. But we kind of talked through it, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna play the strategy I always play, and then I'm gonna figure out, and I'm just going to have to see what the durability is like. The one thing I am terrified of against Custodes is turning off rerolls. So much of the Sisters army requires rerolls to function. Repent should do it. Val does it. Activating Zealot on, say, Zephyrim requires it. Everything like that. All your Canoness and Lieutenant rerolls, or Captain and Lieutenant from your Canoness and Val rerolls, it all just becomes, if you can't do them, it becomes very hard. So what I wanted to do in my secondary choices here was I wanted to score points without interacting with my opponent as much as possible. And I've said this before, and I will say it again. I always make a mistake on this map, except for this one time. So what I normally do is I set myself up to create 2 shrines. So either I have the shrine above where I'm deployed, or I have my shrine to the right. Now, the shrine to the right has slightly more cover, weirdly, but it's 12 inches away. Whereas the shrine to the north has less cover, but is 9 inches away. So you kind of have to play around it very safe. Like, you have to plan your movements perfectly, and you'll see this about how. I've just realised on this slide I have 2 units swapped around. The Repentia at the top should be swapped with the Zephyrim underneath in the 2 kind of central ruins. And the reason I do this is it sets up 2 units: the Novitiates coming out of the Rhino, and the Repentia. And the Zephyrim that move 12 inches. So you've got 9 and 12, both of which that could get onto that top point, score my shrine turn 1, and then and often what I would do is I would raise banners, but I didn't want to raise banners here. I was like, he's a mega elite army, probably can't screen out his backfield easily. But I should be able to score Nephilim for 8, and I was happy with that. So yeah, I set up 1 unit of Battle Sisters at the bottom, and 1 unit of Zephyrim at the bottom, because what that allowed me to do is it allowed me to tag a Caladius that was going there, using Miracle Dice to just charge in incredibly far. The Battle Sisters were set up so that over 2 turns they could walk into that quarter and then score me my Retrieve Nephilim in that quarter. And this so we're talking about secondaries, and my opponent took Assassinate. I told him I had 5 characters. I told him that taking Assassinate against Sisters is notoriously dangerous, because our characters hide the back. We can stand up when they die. There is so much more death between you and them that you're probably not getting to them. He also took the Custody Stranglehold. Is it called Stand Vigil or something like that? I just have it written down as Custody Stranglehold, which is basically hold 3 at the end of the battle round, or hold more at the end of the battle round. And then he took no prisoners. There was debate between whether he'd take no prisoners or grind them down. And I told him no prisoners was probably safer than grind them down, because I can be killy, and it could end up where he just gets where he gets kind of I deny it for enough turns. I think no prisoners is the safer. Like, he had essentially tabled me at the end of the game, but I'd scored all my points, so it didn't really matter. And I think that's just how it kind of played out more than anything. So what happened? He went first. This immediately puts me at a huge advantage, because Custody Stranglehold is end of battle round, which means I can essentially give him a 0 on Assassinate and 0 on Stranglehold, because I know how much I need to commit to deny it. And that's all I did. I knew I was a secondary advantage, and now I knew I had even more, because I was going to score a 12 at the end of the game. So I was like, right, my game to lose. I just need to live, or I need to live for for the 5 turns, and then score at the end. So he went through a lot of debate as to whether he played mega aggressive with his Caladius, or kind of sat back and shot. And his debate was whether he flies the Caladius into my ruin, touches it, and kills a unit of Repentia, or my Retributors. I was like, you can do whatever you choose, but if you do that, that Caladius is dead. And he was like, that is probably a fair point. Now, he didn't do that. What he did was he just started picking off shots, trying to get cheap angles, good shooting. Did kill 4 Repentia. He moved 2 Dreadnoughts and some infantry into the middle. And I was like, okay. And he turned one of the Dreadnoughts into Shadow Keepers, which made it a -1 attack aura, or something like that. And I just said, okay, that's cool. So I walked my Retributors out, and I said, I'm going to shoot that one, and I'm going to fight the other ones. And he was like, oh yeah, that's a smart move, that is. So on my turn 1, I killed 1 Dreadnought. I put Repentia into the middle, killing another Dreadnought. Oh no, I don't think I killed it. I almost killed it, and I killed all but one wound on a custodian guard that was there, which meant he killed me on the crackback, which meant he held the objective, but because he hadn't walked out onto the other point, the mirror of where my shrine is, he only scored 8 rather than scoring 12 on primary. And then what happened was he was put off by the firepower of my Rets, just being able to essentially delete 1, almost 2 dreadnoughts a turn. That he fell back a bit. He was like, "Oh, I don't want to commit into this." He had the range advantage from his Caladiuses, so just sat back. And I think what he needed to do was to push forward. But as I say, this was very much a masterclass in why 2x10 Retributors in cover is a nightmare, because a single Caladius, two Caladius, could kill like 3 or 4 Retributors a turn, and then I'd res D3, and then they'd shoot a Dreadnought, the Dreadnought would die, and then he'd put the Caladius in again, and this would just keep happening, and I basically only lost the Retributors on turn 5. That I think they were completely gone on my turn 5, but on my turn 5 I didn't need to shoot anything, I just needed to walk Obsec onto points in the middle, etc. He flew one of his Caladius right down where you see the Zephyrim marked in black. The Caladius had flown down there, and what I wanted to do was just basically tag the Caladius and make it really awkward for him to shoot. I took it down to 2 wounds, but that put a CP tax on him because he was constantly using the act on top profile. And then I did the same against the other Caladius with the Castigator at range. They just basically shot at each other and kind of bounced weirdly. And I just played a very, very patient game here, picking off shots with Val, Retributors, occasionally tagging stuff with Zephyrim or Repentia, but largely I didn't do that much. I was just like, I've got my half of the board. You stay in your half of the board. If you come out, I'm going to bop you on the nose, and then we'll see if you want to stay there or not. And my opponent didn't. Repentia and Retributors are scary, and the Retributors in cover are just brutal. As I said at the start, you really have to either overcommit into them or undercommit into them, and neither of which is a valid thing. One of the things I did at the top with the shrine, and I often do this on this mission, I just deep struck the Seraphim onto the shrine with the novitiates. Both were in that ruin behind cover, but it gave me 2 assets, and he couldn't reach them with any of the dreadnoughts. And he could Caladius fire into, and it probably hurt one of the units, but not kill the other. So I would still hold the shrine and get 8. He screened me out very well in his backfield. I kept warning him about Seraphim and Zephyrim and having guaranteed deep strike charges, showing on Miracle Dice, everything like that, because he just had a single unit of 5 Voidsmen holding his back objective. So obviously, if I take him off that hurts a lot. So I was like, I could do this. He basically moved his army backwards to prevent me taking him off it, which is fine. But I think what would have worked for him in this is, I'm not going to hold my objectives, I'm going to hold yours and just walk it all forwards and see how it kind of falls out. But if the Caladiuses had rolled hotter, a lot of my army would be dead. So, like, I don't play Custodians that much. I don't know that much about them. I just know that it was. I was more worried of him coming forwards with everything rather than hanging back, and I think it's just more of an experience thing than anything. So that's kind of this mission. I was really pleased with it. This is the first time I'd ever gone 3-0 on day 1 of a GT, and I played against 3 really good opponents and 3 relatively meta lists. Necrons, very strong, very meta army. Creations of Bile, very meta army. and Custodes in particularly this kind of kit out is a very meta army, and I done well, and I was really pleased with it. I think my friends had all done relatively well as well. And what this meant was I knew that I was either going to be facing in the next round the Custodes player with 3 units of bikes, double Catan Necrons, or Chaos Knights. Those were the people who were all undefeated, and obviously we play then. And I was like, okay, I think I can handle, or the one I want to play against least, especially knowing that I'm playing on Tide of Conviction, is double Catan Necrons. I think the other ones, I've played Necrons on it a few times, and I've played Chaos Knights on it once, and I think it's it was very tough, but I could win both of those. But double Catan Necrons just chipping away all my units all the time was going to be very hard, and they have the huge scoring potential, and if I happen to roll first, then I'm at a huge scoring deficit, and yeah. So obviously what happened was that I ended up playing double Catan Necrons on Tide of Conviction at the start of day 2. And this was my only loss of the event, and it was a very narrow loss, and that loss entirely comes down to dice rolls. And I was so happy that that's what happened. I worked so hard to get this far, and I only lost to dice rolls, and I am okay with that. So cool thing, I didn't know this. The GT at Leodis started at 9 on Saturday, but it started at 10 on Sunday, which meant I got a lie-in. And I was so happy about that, because normally GTs can be like exhausting when you're like up and traveling and somewhere for 9, then and then playing all day, and then do it again the next day. So this was my game against David. I knew I played against David at some point. And this was an amazing game. This was such a good game, and we were like we both chatted to each other like, neither of us are happy playing this game as our round 4, and we were like playing 2 and 10. Everything was kind of pre-measured. We knew exactly what was possible, what wasn't, etc., etc. And it was a fantastic game. I'm trying to think of the best way to phrase this. I think I went into this thinking I was going to lose, and therefore I almost wanted my opponent to win, and I helped them win too much. I could have played it out and been like, and maybe squeaked the victory, which I'll talk about. But this is going to be kind of a long discussion, because it was a great game. So very standard double Catan Necrons. So double Catan, Silent King, Scarabs, Ophidians as fast movers, 1 unit of Tomb Blades, and then some Scorpex, and some other nonsensey bits that, like other characters, Technomancer, Chronomancer, all that stuff. And what I knew was because of the way Treasures of the Aeons works, and he has to basically he has to hold the 2 objectives on my side of the board. I was like, right, I'm gonna nominate the 3 in a triangle on my, like the 2 on my side and the 1 closest to them, rather than the 1 outside the Necron Castle. Because what that basically means is I've got the smallest area to control, and then I'm just going to do what I can to pin him back over in the Necron Castle. And during deployment, this is where I said I'd mention it again. Against my opponent, I went, right, there is only one place on the board that the Silent King is in theory safe turn 1, and it's here. And he kept trying to put it around the middle where the Catan and the Scarabs are. And I was like, I can walk my Rets here, I can drive Cassie and Val here, I can shoot him turn 1. And he was like, you've played this way too much. I was like, no, I've played against Necrons on this, and I know where and when you can't do it. and so on. And then kind of we went, and then slowly deployment showed. Key thing I did this game, I used my outflanking of Repentia. So I outflanked a 4 and an 8. And I knew what I wanted to try and set up was charges from them into the 2 flanks. I wanted to try to keep him pinned into his castle. And I set up my Zephyrim to keep pinging one flank, and then I basically set up my entire other army to control the 3 treasures of the Aeon site. Now, I made a mistake. I moved my Rhino. Initially, I moved my Rhino safely into the ruin. It had the other 8 Repentia in it. And I moved it across the board too late. I moved it over the board 1 turn too late. But at the same point, the threat of them being there also kind of made my opponent hang back. So maybe I should have done it sooner. Maybe I shouldn't. I'll talk through the game, and it's one of those learning points. So I took Defend the Shrine, Leap of Faith banners. My shrine was obviously going to be the one near my entire army. I did debate about putting it over on the other side, but I thought that was the one my opponent could attack should he want to pre-game to be able to get on top of it and things like that. I took Leap of Faith and I took banners. And the reason I took banners is I knew I needed to score highly. If I didn't take something that could score highly, my opponent's secondaries are better than mine. So I had to be very aggressive in... And obviously, if my opponent denies them, I lose them, but then he's feeding me assets. And because he's double Catan, he doesn't have a lot of them that he can just throw away. And what happened was I lost the dice roll, which meant I was going first. So I won the dice roll, shall we say, but I lost. And on this map, there are 8 points available, 2 for each of your opponents outside in their half, not in their deployment zone, and 4 in their deployment zone at the end of the game. So that's potentially 8 points there for going second. Plus you get the 4 for potentially getting a 12, which gets you... which essentially gives you a 12-point advantage, similar to Abandoned Sanctuaries at the beginning of day 1. And that is so brutal, because it means I have to play so aggressively. So what I did was I played aggressively. I outflanked the Repentia, knowing that I was going to charge both sides. So I moved the Repentia. So my turn 2... Turn 1 was basically a mulligan for me. I could get no shooting because everything was obscured. And then I just basically staged. It was important. I tried to... So I moved my Zephyrim out to try to get a charge on his Lich Guard that were holding one of his treasures of the Aeon site. And it was an 8-inch charge. I didn't have any miracle dice because I'd used them to charge with my Repentia in. The Repentia cleared some Scorpex and essentially just left him not on his left objective, or the left objective for me, his right objective, so around his big L. And my Zephyrim failed their charge when there was 8 of them into the Lich Guard, and I was going to dump so much CP to kill this squad because that would 0 him on primary, which would be a 4 to 8 point swing, which I'll come into. And what happened there was they failed their charge. It was an 8-inch charge. I re-rolled it with CP. It was a 6 into a 6. Nothing I could do. And they were just stood in the open. And it was like, okay. And they were like, okay, this is not good. And the reason it's important is if I kill those Lich Guard, I deny him 4 primary, and I control his objective, which means I get 2. So that's a 6-point swing in my favour. I win the game on that. With the Repentia on my turn 2, going into his, I had shot him off the point, and what happened was my opponent basically my opponent forgot to declare his protocol, and he could have reanimated a scarab using a technomancer onto the point, which would allow him to control it, which allowed him to score an 8 rather than 4 on the other side. So it would have been 4-point swing for either one of those I'd take off him, and I almost took him off both. But he forgot to declare that, and I was like, look, mate, I'm not that guy. You could have easily done that, so you do it. I would rather play an honest game than each of us, than it be a dishonest game and everything like that. So gave him that, which again, 4 points, and this game was within 3 points. So if I was a worse human being, I would have won. If I had rolled better dice, I would have won. If I had gone second, probably would have won. And then, so at this point, we're all hanging around. My opponent moves his Tomb Blades out to kill the Repentia that are now kind of lining his ruin, which allows me to get Val and Cassie to shoot them. Because as soon as they're dead, the rest of my Repentia are kind of safe. On the next turn, my Zephyrim charge in and they leave 1 or 2 Lich Guard alive, which again, very frustrating. The Catan chipped 2 of them down. I think if I'd had 2 more Zephyrim, which is another 8 attacks on the charge, that would with exploding 6s auto wound, and I gave them Zealot, they would probably be dead. And that was just I also rolled horrifically on the attacks. It was like the seas of 1s and 2s, but it's dice game, it happens. I don't actually think my Retributors, so my Retributors got to shoot once, and this was my one chance to kill the scarabs that were continuously reanimating onto the point. And they killed 3 of them because he had the 5-up invuln, and that just basically meant that point was locked down. Then my Repentia came in on the right-hand flank, killed all the scarabs there, leaving only 2 units of Ophidians. And what this essentially meant was he had to start committing his Ophidians to be able to control points and things like that. And he was debating about whether he moves some of the Ophidians forward. I think this is turn 3 or 4. And again, this is a learning point for me. I'm a very nice player, and I always believe in trying to educate people. And what I had said to him at the beginning of the game is, this is your game to lose. You can stand still and win the game as long as you score your ancient machineries, your treasures, and your purge. So make sure that you don't overcommit anything. And he was going to move both his units of Ophidians forward. It is Ophidians. And what I just said to him, it's a weakness in me in trying to help people. I was like, if you do this, you're potentially giving me the game, because I can kill both of these, and then you have no scarabs and no Ophidians that can come and do the last ancient machineries you need, or do the last, or hold another point for treasures of the Aeons, or there were so many ors, and I was like, if you just wait one more turn, the game's probably locked up. And once he had kind of made that, not committing his Catan, not committing the Ophidians, and realised he could play passively and just score at the end of the game, that's when I was like, okay, that's fine. I can't win once you adapt this. I think from my point of view, I probably shouldn't be telling people how to beat me. But at the same point, I know how oppressive sisters can feel, so I want people to feel they're in the game. I shouldn't have coached him through that. That's my bad, because I could have easily taken it. If I denied, so there's already been 3 points we've talked about where if he'd actually kept with a mistake and scored 4, I win the game. If my Zephyrim make a charge, they kill the game. Oh, they win the game. And if he moves those Ophidians out, I win the game. If I move my Rhino over so that the Repentia inside can 1 turn earlier, so that the Repentia inside can attack the Lich Guard or the Ophidians, I win the game. you'll see that I deep struck my Seraphim in my backfield. That's because I just wanted to screen out the Veil. I'd screened out Veil of Darkness perfectly, and they were just there to keep screening Veil because they had no good targets. If he had moved the Ophidians out, my Canoness goes into them because she's positioned in the other. She advances charges in, probably murders 1 or 2 Ophidians because reroll all hits, wound on 3s, I believe. And I'd turn off invuln. They don't have an invuln, so never mind. But you know what I mean? It'd be like, and 2 damage each, so every 2 through. Then they fight her. If they kill her, she fights on death again. Otherwise, it's just kind of... It denies assets and so on. And all of this made it a fantastic game. It was absolutely amazing. If I'd kept some more OBSEC alive, I could have potentially screened him walking onto that objective. He knew he couldn't take my shrine objective because at the end of the game, I basically had 20 Retributors, all with Dogmata granted OBSEC, and some battles, like, and he couldn't take the shrine off me, no matter what he put there. So he just gave up on that. So he went to go for the other one. And if I had moved my assets over sooner, I could have screened out that, denied him kind of the last ancient machineries, the last treasures of the Aeons. If any of my stuff had survived, I could have denied Purge the Vermin, which I maybe should have done. Like if my Zephyrim had killed... What are you up to, Pika? Oh, you got some paper. Okay. Yeah, there are so many pivotal points in this game where dice rolls, decisions coming a turn earlier, a turn later would have made it. It was fantastic. David was absolutely amazing. At the end of the game, he just said to me, he's like, Andy, you've taught me more in this game than I've learned in the past, 2 years, 3 years playing this game. This has been such an amazing... I felt really good. Obviously, I felt bad for losing, but I knew it was his game to lose. But yeah, he was absolute star. Made me feel great, and he learned a lot. And that's kind of what I do in these videos and in how I play. I want everyone to... Just the better everyone else gets at the game, the better all the games everyone has will be. And the more people are happy and confident in strategies, then the more dynamic the game becomes. And I think David is kind of aggressive at heart, where he wants to kind of move out aggressively and deny assets and so on. And sometimes this game is very much well, actually, if I do nothing, I win. And again, it's not an invalid strategy, but it's just a different strategy, and being able to adapt. I know the games where I have to be aggressive or not, and I think learning that is a very important thing. So, as I say at the end, I lost an honest game rather than winning a dishonest one, and I only lost by 3 points. And I believe any game that you win or lose within 8 points is a fantastic game, because that's kind of a primary swing. And yeah, absolutely fantastic. Loved it. I learnt a lot from playing against it. I actually shouldn't be as scared as Double Catan as I thought I should be. Them chipping 1 or 2 models doesn't do very much, but it does lower the efficiency a lot, which is something I wasn't aware of and cost me with the Zephyrim. So that was that game. Here's a problem, and this is something I don't really like with the system. Me losing to David here means I will play someone that is 3-1. And if I win that game and win it well, I'm more likely... I could actually end up higher if David loses the final, etc. Because typically the way games work is they're either an absolute crushing, or they're very close and someone wins. The problem is, priority target, which is the final, is either an absolute crushing or it's very close. Which means that if I go into the final and get to move the objectives, there is a better chance of me winning than if I go into the final and my opponent moves the first objective. And that's probably the same that David had. And what happens is, in those things where your opponent dictates the pace of the game, if that doesn't suit your army, then it becomes more of a crushing, you lose more points. And this is exactly what happened here. So David advanced to the final, played against Ben. Ben is fantastic. I think Ben is now the best Chaos Knights player in the world. He was playing Abaddon, War Dogs, and a small demon patrol. And essentially, Ben got to move the objective, moved the objective out into the open, which made it incredibly hard. Do you want your ball throwing, Pika? You do. And it made it incredibly hard. And therefore, I think David only scored about 50 to 60 points. Whereas in my game, I was against Yukari, which we'll talk through next. And I won, and I scored 90 plus points. And that put me in second over David, who where it's done on kind of win-loss brackets and all of that, David would be second. And it's just such a strange thing where actually, from a pure placing standpoint, it may actually be better to lose certain games. I don't like that. I don't like that as a tiebreaker. Because I think games should just be as good as games are. But anyway, so that was round 4. Absolutely fantastic game. Loved it. Would play this again and again. It was clutch how the game played out and so on. And this was my best game of the tour. Well, this was the best game I played. I had games where I scored higher. But this was the best play game where I played my best and so on. But I need to overcome my own kind of mentality of saying I have already lost this game and not give it to my opponent, because I think I probably did give it to David too early and so on, and that's on me. So, final game was against Drukari. And this, again, I dislike this mission. So, secure missing artifacts, better known as priority targets. Before the game starts, you get to move the objectives. And this basically dictates the entire pace of the game. The other problem with this is if you hold 2 objectives and always hold your priority target at the end of the game, you will score 47 primary, which maxes at 45. Which is why you see it goes 3, 3, 3, 3, 1. Which means to max your primary, you have 0 incentive of interacting with your opponent. Great. Sisters also, because of their secondaries, Defend the Shrine, Leap of Faith, and in this case banners, can score their secondaries without interacting with their opponent. And sisters, in the way they work, if your opponent tries to interact with you, you punish them, and you punish them hard. And that's exactly what happened in this game. I got to move the objectives first, which meant I moved the objective just outside my deployment zone to just near my deployment zone. And the reason you do this, because you don't put it in your deployment zone, because then you can't have it as your shrine. Because it has to be outside your deployment zone to be your shrine. Then what? So I moved that. He moves my objective out into the open. Me knowing how to play this, I just hold it with a character and have it be granted lookout, sir. Yada yada yada. He also doesn't have a huge amount of shooting, so it kind of gives me an advantage there. And then he moves his objective behind his thing, but behind his or near his ruin, so that he can also hold it from behind cover. And then I move the final one, and I move it into the position shown in yellow near boats and stuff in boats. And the reason I put it here is there is angles onto this objective with shooting that Cassie and Morvenval can reach. And if you can set it there specifically, the castigator can be oppressive, particularly against Eldar, because it's just like, here's a boatload of stuff and shots at range, and that is exactly what happened. So I choose in this because, right, just hold on. Tika, like some attention. So he's going to join me. Say hello. Yep. There she is. Right, so so I chose Defend the Shrine because I can nominate a very safe shrine. Leap of Faith because it is a fantastic secondary and really good. And then I chose Raise the Banners. I know I'm going to score 10 on it realistically. It's going to be very. My opponent is also probably going to take Banners and score 10 on it. But then they have to take. Heard the Prey is kind of less interactive. It might score 9 or 10. And then Take Them Alive is also going to be. He has to come and kill me. So, broadly speaking, I was like, okay, well, you have to come and kill me, and I have long-range firepower. I also have Seraphim, which are terrifying for elves, because it's like, okay, well, here's a load of flamer shots, and just puts a load of saves on them, and so on. So, those are my two best assets against them. The reason I haven't been able to tell you much about what was in the boats, it was either racks or incubi. And basically what happened in this game, I got to move the objectives first, which heavily favours me. I did not choose the passion. So I didn't choose exploding sixes. I chose +1 to advance, +1 to charge. And the reason I did this is because they are T3 1 wound models. Everything I put onto them is probably going to kill them unless they roll an invul save. So having exploding sixes probably doesn't help here. However, additional movement and bigger charges does. And particularly on Repentia, when they can advance and charge, you can potentially get a lot more movement. So I did this. I told my opponent and I said, my maximum Repentia threat range is going to be 25 inches. Because they move 6, could advance 7, and then have a 12-inch charge, but they would move 13, because you've got to be within 12 to declare a charge. And knowing this, he deployed quite far back. I know that I believe on this mission we are 24.8 inches away from each other on the deployment line, which means I can make turn 1 charges here if I roll 6s into boxcars and so on. Or I get miracle dice if I go second and things like that. My opponent deploys very defensively, knowing that I could threaten a turn 1 charge, which wouldn't be devastating, but it would be annoying if I pulled it off. And what that meant is, as soon as deployment had happened, I openly said to my opponent, like, we kind of know how this game is going to go already. I don't mind not playing it. If you just want to talk it out, I'm happy to play it out to see how the dice favour. But I think we both kind of, and he knew it as well. He was saying, I know, just so that I get his name right, this was Dan. We both kind of knew how the game was going to play out to begin with, where I was going to score high secondaries. He has to make a play and will probably end up losing on secondaries if I defend everything on mine well. He basically has to crush my primary to beat my secondaries. And if he doesn't do it at the right time, then I will just push back and push into his primary. Because I had the Seraphim as a deep strike threat, and their ability to come down, shoot in the movement phase, and then shoot in the shooting phase into 2 different units, what that allows you to do is it allows you to basically say, you can't put your army together. You put your army together, I could potentially kill 2 units of infantry. And what that meant is he had to spread out, screen them coming down to stop me firing into all his stuff. And he did, and I barely got line of sight on things, but on my turn 2, after his turn 1, he had moved his Hellions forward, but there was a couple sneaking out because he didn't have the distance on near where his other where his priority target was, and what that meant was the Castigator could see them, and I killed 7 Hellions, but they passed morale, which was great. I was really hoping they failed morale because that would have been game with them. But I did that. My Seraphim came down and they could see a unit of Corsairs, and they killed them in the movement phase. And then they were just stood there not being able to shoot anything in the shooting phase. But at the same time, I also had Novitiates come out of my Rhino and charge the boat that was hidden in the corner of the ruin at the top, wrap it, forcing my opponent to use Desperate Breakout to get out of it, killed the boat. His Succubus came out towards my army. The rest of it went backwards. And it essentially all I was doing the entire game was pushing his army backwards. I'd set up my shrine so that if my opponent charged the Battle Sisters on the shrine, then my Fight Last Canoness would fight last whatever charges into them, and then could potentially heroic round depending on where they engage. And then I also had 8 Zephyrim that if they were tagged, they could also pile onto the point. And it was just such an unattractive thing to charge into that he decided to go and murder a loader for a pencher. However, he rolled very, very badly. Similarly with his Liquefier Racks, when they were trying to kill the Seraphim, I think they killed 2 of them, 1 of them, 2 of them, which should have been a lot more. But it just didn't roll enough shots, didn't roll enough wounds, etc. And then the Hellions that lived didn't roll any wounds. They rolled hits, but didn't roll any wounds against the Seraphim. So at the end of our turn 2, I had lost 4 Repentia, 1 Novitiate, and 2 Seraphim. And I still had all my Hand Flamers, all my Repentia, and I was like, I'm just going to go into the middle now, because that way, if you ever try to attack my home objective, I'm still going to... You now have to commit to the middle, because I'm still going to score my 8s one way or another. So it pushed it even further into the back. Morvenval, absolute hero this game. She just shot crack missiles at boats and kind of picked off a boat a turn, 2 boats a turn. Didn't realise Pika had just sat here, but she is. The Castigator was picking off boats and Hellion. Like, Castigator just dominated this because anything that walked out into the open just got shot, and it was very, very challenging. My Retributors never shot once. They just walked and slowly and surely just walked. And after we'd played like two, maybe 3 turns, we had like an hour-ish left, and we knew the pace of the game. My opponent had some really bad dice rolls, and like we both felt really bad about it because I was like, I like there's nothing I can do, and he was like, no, it's just been dice rolls. But the important thing is, again, similar to game 4, my opponent just was saying to me like, you've taught me so much about this game, about 40k, just playing this game and this map, and you being able to predict the scores. So I said to him at the start, it's like, I think I win this game by about 10 points, given I've got to move the objectives. And I said this before we'd even taken a turn. After I'd seen deployment, I was like, I think I win by about 10 points because of secondaries, because I think my secondaries slightly beat your secondaries, and it's going to be within 10 points, depending on how much you can kill me and how much I commit to deny you herd and everything like that. And we kind of played it out, and then it was like, actually, yeah, you do, you win by that. And we talked it out, and it was 92 to 83, so 9 points. So yeah, I was pretty much right. But yeah, this mission needs some looking at, because priority target is, it's weird. Like, the fact that there is zero incentive to go to the middle because you can score 45 primary without. The fact that some armies can massively swing one way or another depending on who moves the objectives. Again, I'm just not a fan of how these missions kind of how some of the missions work. I think, yes, there is a problem with alpha striking, and therefore having missions that score for going second is good. I think that's great. But I think we need to. There needs to be something. There needs to be some sort of workaround that's less kind of not bullish, but just as I said, and I said it's to another player there. I think it's Stephanie. I said to her, I got to move the objectives, and she, as soon as I said that to her, she was like, "Oh, so you probably won by about 10 points." And I was like, "Yep, that's exactly what happened," and we both knew it as soon as the game started. And yeah, like, I don't like the idea. I love the idea of there being inevitability. I think inevitability needs to exist, but it just needs toning down a little bit. If that wasn't a 10 points and that was a 5 points, then that's a primary swing or 2 primary swings. You know what I mean? Like, it can very suddenly shift it into another direction. So that's kind of the talk out of this. So let me just flip back to here. So yeah, that was kind of my Leodis GT pack tournament report. I've still got all my sheets. I came second overall with Adepta Sororitas. I love the faction. I love the way they play. I am just a bit. There's few problems I see. One, they can be very uninteractive, and I don't think that's fun for everyone. It's fun for tournament goers that want to win, because you can play a passive game and win passively. I don't think that is healthy. I think the missions maybe need something else to stop a passive game being winning. Like, and you can see it. Like, our output is good, but it's not as good as some of the best output armies like Tau or Tyranids. Our scoring is good, but it's not as good as the scoring of Necrons or Harlequins. But all of those, well, Necrons and Harlequins can score passively and can win without doing anything, and that's problematic. Similarly, Sisters can score highly, not as highly, but highly, without being without a lot of interacting, and therefore there needs to be something across those, which is a kind of secondary problem. I think the output is fine of Sisters. It is a lot, but it is in short range. So if people come to you, that's when it's good. And I think a lot of these missions, particularly going second, favor Sisters just because they have the output to push the opponent who has to be aggressive into them. So I'm not expecting any balanced data slate changes, although they might happen. I would expect there to be some minor points tweaks, so maybe the Zephyrim point revision. Why they went down 2 points, I will never know. Maybe Repentia go up a point, or Zephyrim go up a point, and that's the way you like that. Take 40 points out of my list, and that's probably a fair trade. It means I'd have to drop 3 Zephyrim or something like that. But otherwise, I think I actually think Sisters are very fair. You know exactly what you're getting into with them, and I think what we need to do is bring up other armies, secondaries, to be able to play at the same level. I would rather see other factions get buffed than Sisters get nerfed, shall we say? Because I think Sisters are they're not on a knife edge, but they're close to it. Where if they get points hikes and their secondaries get nerfed and the other armies get better around them, then they can fall off a cliff very quickly, particularly given how complicated they are to play and how much layering is needed to use them well, and so on. I think the tournament was fantastic. It was really well run. I like coming from competitive systems like Magic the Gathering and other card game tournaments. I think the way tiebreakers are done is weird, but that's just me speaking from those experiences. But again, can't change much about that. I think overall it's good. I love the UKTC pack. I think a couple of bits of the terrain need sorting out. Death and Zeal is the one that I think needs the most change, because there's basically an entire table court with one ruin in it you need 12 inches of movement to be able to get behind, and you know what I mean. It's like, I think stuff like that needs just looking at again. Otherwise, it seems fine. I think the missions, there needs to be a couple of tweaks. There are some of them that just feel bad. Maybe this is a tie-in with UKTC. Starting on Abandoned Sanctuaries, where there's a huge incentive for going second, and then on day one, feels bad. Because if you roll and you go first, you almost feel like you've already lost, which just feels so bad as game one. And then game one of day two, or typically round 4, on Tide of Conviction, where there's so many points for going second, again, you roll to go first, and it feels bad when you go first. So I would just be I'd maybe put those later in the day, because obviously the start of day 1 and day 2 can pretty much determine your tournament. If you start the tournament and go first and lose that roll-off, then you're almost like, well, I can't win. Again, I can't win at this tournament, and that just feels awful. And then similarly, at the start of day 2, say you've gone undefeated on day 1, and you lose that one because you rolled to go first, as happened in this, you almost feel cheated out of it, because it's like, well, it was just that dice roll. My player skill wasn't involved in it, because they could get plus 12 at the end of the battle round, at the end of the battle, and just I'd maybe put them later on, or just in a different slot. I'd probably remove secure missing artifacts, honestly, because it's not I love the mission, but I don't think it's a healthy mission for good gameplay. I would love to see tear down their icons in here, which is the bomb planting one. I think that would be a really interesting addition to the kind of early on in the pack, because there's a lot of player skill in that. Although there is the same problem as priority, where if you plant 3 bombs, you can max primary, not doing anything else. But you actually have to do actions, plant 3 bombs, and they have to be 9 inches apart, blah, stuff like that. So I think that'd be an interesting one to bring in. Recover the relics or the scouring. I think you could bring either of those in. I know the scouring is often like the final or the 6th round, and that would be quite an interesting addition just to bring in, because we actually don't have any lengthways ones. Are they Dawn of War? I think they're Dawn of War, rather than Hammer and Anvil. I don't know. I don't know the names. Shows my novice nature and so on. I think one of those would be interesting, but I know some people don't like them. But yeah, something needs to be done about Abandoned Sanctuaries and Tide of Conviction, because they just feel awful. But yeah, thank you to Leodis Games. Thank you to UKTC and to Goonhammer for providing all the assets that I've kind of used today and everything like that. Thank you for the community that's been around. And yeah, this is kind of the first time I've done a format like this. I don't know if this is the best way to record these, whether I need to do them shorter, just talk round by round or something like that. But I just wanted to do it all in one video so that people could kind of see exactly how I played, what I did, what my thought process was, and how it goes. I would love to hear your comments if you want to leave some. I don't know whether people watch or listen to these, but I'm still going to keep recording them. because hopefully it might help some people along the way. But yeah, like, I don't often say it, but yeah, the whole kind of like, comment, subscribe, it does actually help, because it will encourage me to keep recording them and to keep showing you how I am playing Adepta Sororitas and how I'm doing all right with them. But yeah, thank you very much for tuning in, and I really appreciate anyone that does watch this. So thank you very much.